The massive crystalline chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with the usual diplomatic chatter as representatives from 237 species gathered for the quarterly assembly. Ambassador Zekthar of the Vortanian Empire adjusted his ceremonial robes while reviewing the agenda on his neural interface. Trade disputes, territorial negotiations, and the ongoing hegemony expansion protocols filled the schedule. What didn't fill the schedule was any mention of humanity. Zekthar found this odd. The humans had been active participants in galactic politics for nearly 3 centuries, ever since their spectacular debut when they single-handedly ended the Krillian War. Their representative, Ambassador Sarah Chen, was known for her sharp wit and uncanny ability to find solutions that benefited everyone involved. She had missed only 2 sessions in her 15-year tenure, both due to documented medical emergencies. The Altarian delegate, a tall being with multiple eye stalks, approached Zekthar's hovering platform. "Have you heard from the human delegation?" Thisara asked, her translator rendering her clicking sounds into standard Galactic. "Their transport was scheduled to arrive yesterday." Zekthar checked his communications array again. Nothing from Earth's diplomatic corps. No delay notifications, no emergency transmissions, no routine status updates that typically flooded the channels before major assemblies. Perhaps they're simply running behind schedule. You know how humans can be with their organic time perceptions. Thisara's eye stalks swiveled in what her species considered a gesture of doubt. "Unlikely. Ambassador Chen is more punctual than a Chronarch's atomic clock. Something feels wrong about this." High Counselor Vexani, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, materialized at the center of the chamber. The conversations died as every species turned their attention to the ancient entity that had guided the council for over a millennium. "Esteemed delegates," Vexani's voice resonated through psychic channels that bypassed the need for translation. "We begin today's session with an unusual matter. The human delegation has failed to respond to all communication attempts. We have received no word from Earth's government, their colonial administrations, or any human settlement within council space." A ripple of concern spread through the assembly. The Zelithians, known for their paranoid nature, immediately began speculating about plague or invasion. The logical Synthari started calculating probability matrices for various catastrophic scenarios. Ambassador Kretok of the Hegemony, a militant species that had always viewed humans with suspicion, stood from his designated area. His scarred carapace gleamed under the chamber's bioluminescent lighting. Perhaps the humans have finally revealed their true nature. Their rapid expansion and technological advancement has always been suspicious. Zekthar's tentacles bristled at the implication. The humans have been exemplary council members. Their contributions to science, medicine, and conflict resolution are undeniable. Whatever has happened, we should approach this with concern for our allies, not suspicion. High Counselor Vexani pulsed with a calming blue light. "Preliminary investigations have been initiated. Long-range sensors indicate no signs of warfare, plague, or natural disaster in human space. Their worlds appear intact but quiet, too quiet." The Merchant Guild representative, a cybernetically enhanced Folorian, accessed her trade databases with visible concern. "Trade flows from human space ceased exactly 72 hours ago. All commercial vessels either turned back at the borders or simply stopped responding. The economic implications alone." Thisara's eye stalks focused intently on the data streaming across her personal display. "This is unprecedented. Even during the Silence Wars, basic diplomatic protocols were maintained for an entire species to simply disappear from communication." Commander Velter of the Peacekeeping Forces, a massive Goliathan whose species served as the Council's military arm, rumbled his concerns. "My scouts report that human patrol ships along the neutral zones have withdrawn to positions deeper in their territory. No hostility, no emergency beacons, just departure." The chamber erupted in worried murmurs and heated discussions. Every species had different theories, different concerns, different fears about what humanity's silence might mean for the galactic community. High Counselor Vexani expanded their energy field, commanding attention once more. "Emergency protocols are now in effect. A diplomatic mission will be dispatched to Sol's system within the next standard cycle. Until we understand the nature of this situation, all scheduled votes and new legislation are postponed." As delegates began filing out of the chamber, their conversations were hushed but intense. Zekthar remained at his platform, staring at the empty space where Ambassador Chen should have been sitting. In all his decades of diplomatic service, he had never encountered anything quite like this. The humans hadn't declared war, hadn't sent threats or ultimatums, hadn't even bothered to formally withdraw from the council. They had simply stopped talking. For a species known for their constant communication, their endless debates and discussions, their inability to remain silent during any conflict, this behavior was more unsettling than any military buildup could have been. What Zekthar couldn't know, what none of the delegates could possibly imagine, was that humanity's silence wasn't born of catastrophe or aggression. It was born of disappointment, so profound that an entire species had collectively decided that some conversations simply weren't worth having anymore. The real question wasn't why the humans had stopped talking. The real question was whether they would ever choose to speak to the galaxy again. The diplomatic vessel *Harmony's Edge dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, its mixed crew of 12 representatives from various council species staring at their sensors in growing bewilderment. Captain Thesara commanded the ship with her usual efficiency, but even her multiple eye stalks couldn't process what they were observing. "Report," she ordered, though her tone carried an uncertainty that her crew had never heard before. Lieutenant Commander Zekthar, serving as the mission's diplomatic lead, manipulated the holographic display with his tentacles. "All human vessels are present and accounted for. Defense platforms are online and functional. No signs of damage, conflict, or technological failure." The Synthari analyst, Processor Unit 7742, interfaced directly with the ship's computers. "Fascinating. Human settlements show normal power signatures, standard atmospheric compositions, and regular thermal patterns consistent with inhabited worlds. Yet communication arrays remain completely silent." From her position at the tactical station, hegemony observer Krina shifted uncomfortably in her environmental suit. Unlike her aggressive cousin who had spoken at the council, she specialized in intelligence gathering and found the current situation deeply troubling. "They're watching us. I can feel it. My species has instincts for these things." Science Officer Dr. Kelani, a peaceful Etherian whose species existed partially in subspace, extended her consciousness toward Earth. Her translucent form shimmered as she attempted to sense the planet's emotional resonance. "There is sadness here, profound sadness, but also something else. Resolve, determination. The psychic signature is unlike anything I've encountered." Captain Thesara ordered a slow approach toward Earth's outer defensive perimeter. As they drew closer, the silence became even more eerie. Normally, this region of space buzzed with commercial traffic, patrol vessels, and the constant chatter of a thriving interstellar civilization. Now it felt like approaching a graveyard. "Incoming transmission," announced communications specialist Velkir, his excitement quickly dampening as he processed the message. "It's automated. Standard navigation warnings and no-entry protocols, nothing personal." Zekthar studied the legal text scrolling across his display. "They're not hostile, but they're not welcoming either. We're being directed to maintain our current position pending." "Pending what?" "There's no indication of when or if we'll receive permission to proceed." Hours passed in frustrating limbo. The diplomatic team tried every protocol, every emergency code, every back-channel communication method in their considerable repertoire. Nothing elicited a response beyond automated acknowledgments that their messages had been received and were under review. Finally, Dr. Kelani made an announcement that changed everything. "I'm detecting a small vessel approaching from Earth. Single-occupant, basic diplomatic configuration. They're actually coming to meet us." The ship that docked with *Harmony's Edge was unremarkable by human standards. A simple diplomatic shuttle with minimal armaments and standard council-compliant identification systems. What was remarkable was its pilot. Former Ambassador Sarah Chen stepped through the airlock wearing civilian clothes rather than her usual diplomatic attire. Her appearance shocked the delegation. The woman who had been known for her immaculate presentation and boundless energy looked tired, almost worn down. Her famous smile was nowhere to be seen. "Ambassador Chen," Zekthar began formally, "the Council is deeply concerned about Earth's sudden silence. We've come to offer assistance and determine if—" "I'm not Ambassador Chen anymore," she interrupted quietly. I resigned my position 3 days ago, along with every other human diplomat in Council space. I'm here as a private citizen, as a courtesy, to deliver a message." The delegation exchanged worried glances. Captain Thesara gestured toward the ship's conference room. "Perhaps we should discuss this more comfortably." Sarah shook her head. "This won't take long. The message is simple. Humanity is withdrawing from galactic politics. Effective immediately, all human representatives are recalled, all diplomatic ties are severed, and all council agreements are void." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Processor Unit 7742 spoke up, his synthetic voice carrying an unusual emotional subroutine. "This does not compute. Humanity has been a valued council member for centuries. What precipitated this decision?" Sarah's laugh was bitter, completely unlike the warm humor she had been known for. "Valued? We've been tolerated, used when convenient, ignored when profitable, and dismissed whenever our perspective didn't align with established interests." Krina leaned forward aggressively. "That's ridiculous. Humans have held important positions throughout council space. You've been consulted on every major decision." "Consulted, yes. Listened to? That's a different question entirely." Sarah activated a holographic display from her personal device. "Let me share some interesting statistics my government compiled before making this decision." Data streams filled the air between them. Voting records, policy implementations, resource allocations, trade agreements, and conflict resolutions spanning 3 centuries of human participation in galactic politics. In 300 years of council membership, how many human proposals do you think were adopted without significant modification or delay? Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she didn't expect an answer. 12. 12 out of over 4,000 formal submissions. Zekthar's tentacles writhed uncomfortably. The council operates on consensus. All proposals undergo extensive review. The hegemony has had 237 proposals adopted with minimal changes in the same time frame, Sarah continued, her voice growing sharper. The Vortanian Empire, 189. Even the recently admitted Zeridian Collective has seen 43 of their proposals implemented in just the last 50 years. Dr. Kelani's ethereal form pulsed with empathic distress. There must be explanations for these disparities. The Council values all perspectives. Sarah's expression hardened. Does it? Let's talk about the Krillian War. Humanity ended that conflict, saved millions of lives, prevented the collapse of 14 star systems. How many times has that contribution been acknowledged in official council records? How many times has human expertise been sought for similar conflicts since then? The delegation fell silent because they all knew the answer. Humanity's role in ending the Krillian War was mentioned in historical databases, but it had been gradually minimized in official accounts, overshadowed by other species' contributions that came after the fact. Or let's discuss the plague of souls, Sarah continued relentlessly. Human researchers developed the cure that saved the Etherian species from extinction. In gratitude, the Council voted to restrict human access to the very research stations we had built to solve the problem, claiming we were too aggressive in our scientific methods. Captain Thesara's eye stalks drooped with what might have been shame. The Council was concerned about the pace of human advancement. Some species felt threatened by our curiosity, our willingness to ask uncomfortable questions, our refusal to accept that's how it's always been done as a valid argument. Sarah's composure was beginning to crack, revealing the depth of frustration that had been building for decades. She took a deep breath, regaining her diplomatic control. The final straw came 3 months ago, the Council vote on the Hegemony Expansion Protocol. Everyone in the room knew about that vote. It had been contentious, with humanity arguing passionately that allowing the hegemony to absorb 15 independent worlds violated the Council's founding principles of self-determination and peaceful coexistence. We presented evidence, Sarah said quietly. Documented proof of hegemony forces already operating on those worlds, testimony from refugees, economic data showing forced displacement, communication intercepts revealing military planning. Everything needed to prove that this wasn't voluntary expansion but conquest disguised as diplomacy. Krina shifted uncomfortably, knowing her species' reputation for exactly this type of behavior. The vote passed anyway. 212 in favor, 24 opposed, 1 abstention. Even species that privately agreed with our evidence voted against us rather than risk economic retaliation from hegemony trade partnerships. Processor Unit 7742 processed this information with visible difficulty. Surely you understand that politics requires compromise. Not every decision can satisfy every member species. Sarah's smile returned, but it was cold and entirely without humor. You're absolutely right. Politics does require compromise. That's why humanity has made a political decision of our own. She stood to leave, then paused at the airlock. One more statistic for your reports. In 3 centuries of council membership, humanity has never once voted purely in our own economic or territorial interest when it conflicted with council principles. Not once. We've sacrificed trade opportunities, territorial expansion, resource rights, and strategic advantages to maintain the peace and uphold the values this organization claims to represent. The delegation watched her prepare to depart, each struggling with their own species' memories of times when political expediency had trumped principle. This isn't abandonment, Sarah said finally. This is recognition of reality. The council doesn't want partners, it wants compliant members who won't rock the boat. Humanity has never been good at complying when we believe something is wrong. We've decided to stop pretending we can change a system that doesn't want to be changed. As her shuttle departed, leaving the diplomatic vessel alone in the silence of human space, each delegate was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. They had come expecting to find a crisis to solve, a problem to fix, a misunderstanding to clarify. Instead, they had found something far more unsettling, a species that had simply decided their conversation wasn't worth continuing. 6 months after humanity's withdrawal, the Galactic Council faced its first major crisis without human mediation. The conflict erupted between the Merchant Guild and the Zeridian Collective over mining rights in the Proxima Cluster, a dispute that would have typically been resolved through careful diplomacy and compromise. Instead, it escalated into the kind of destructive trade war that the Council had successfully avoided for decades. High Counselor Vexani watched the proceedings with growing frustration as delegates hurled accusations across the crystalline chamber. The Merchant Guild representative accused the Zeridians of violating established territorial agreements. The Zeridian speaker countered that the Guild's claims were based on outdated surveys that ignored their species' recently discovered ancestral connections to the cluster. Ambassador Zekthar found himself attempting to fill the mediator role that had traditionally belonged to humanity. His tentacles moved nervously as he tried to propose a solution that would satisfy both parties. Perhaps a joint mining operation with shared profits could address both concerns. The Merchant Guild representative, a cybernetically enhanced Falorian named Kexira, scoffed at the suggestion. Unacceptable. We've invested considerable resources based on established legal frameworks. Changing the rules now would set a dangerous precedent. Zeridian speaker Yalthes, whose crystalline features reflected the chamber's lighting in angry patterns, dismissed the proposal with equal vehemence. Joint operations would contaminate sacred sites with industrial equipment. Our ancestors' memories are stored in those crystal formations. They cannot be disturbed. What followed was 3 hours of circular arguing, with each side becoming more entrenched in their positions. Other delegates attempted to contribute, but their suggestions either favored one side too heavily or were so watered down as to be meaningless. During a recess, Thisara approached Zekthar in the diplomatic lounge. Her eye stalks drooped with exhaustion. We're missing something. There has to be a solution that addresses both the Guild's investment concerns and the Zeridian cultural requirements. Zekthar manipulated his datapad, reviewing the case files with growing frustration. Sarah Chen would have found it by now. She had this ability to see angles that escaped everyone else. Remember the Altarian succession crisis? She proposed that radical power-sharing agreement that seemed impossible until suddenly everyone realized it was brilliant. Or the hegemony food wars, Thisara added wistfully. Who would have thought that mandatory cultural exchange programs would resolve territorial disputes over agricultural worlds? But somehow she made it work. Their conversation was interrupted by Commander Velter's arrival. The massive Goliathan's usual confidence was notably absent as he slumped into a reinforced chair. The border skirmishes between the Synthari and the Free Traders are escalating. 3 ships destroyed this week, 2 mining stations abandoned. My peacekeeping forces are spread thin trying to contain conflicts that keep multiplying. Processor Unit 7742 glided over on his hover platform, his optical sensors dimmed with what might have been the synthetic equivalent of depression. Statistical analysis indicates a 47% increase in interspecies conflicts since humanity's departure. Diplomatic resolution times have increased by an average of 230%. Council efficiency ratings have dropped below acceptable parameters. The group fell into uncomfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the deteriorating galactic situation. Finally, Thesara voiced what they were all thinking. We need to convince them to come back. Zekthar's tentacles curled skeptically. Based on what argument? We ignored their concerns for centuries and then proved their point spectacularly with that hegemony vote. Why would they trust us now? Because the galaxy needs them, Commander Velter rumbled. Whether we admitted it before or not, they were the glue holding much of this together. Their absence is creating chaos. Dr. Kalani materialized beside them, her ethereal form shimmering with agitation. I've been monitoring the psychic resonance of Council space. The emotional atmosphere is becoming increasingly hostile. Species that maintained peaceful relations for decades are developing mutual suspicion and resentment, without humanity's stabilizing influence. She didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood the implications. Meanwhile, in human space, a very different conversation was taking place. Admiral Rebecca Torres stood in the observation deck of the orbital station New Geneva Asterisk, watching Earth's blue curve through the transparent aluminum viewport. As humanity's new director of external relations, she had the challenging task of managing their species' transition from galactic participants to galactic observers. The Council delegations are becoming more persistent, reported Dr. James Wung, humanity's former head of xenocultural studies. 17 formal requests for renewed diplomatic contact in the last month alone. The Vortanian Empire is offering significant trade concessions if we'll reconsider our position. Admiral Torres continued staring at Earth's surface, her expression thoughtful. And the hegemony, what's their position? Officially, they're claiming that humanity's withdrawal proves we were never truly committed to galactic unity. Unofficially, their expansion into the 15 disputed systems has stalled. Resistance movements are stronger than expected, and they're requesting Council support to complete the integration. A bitter smile crossed Tor's face. Of course they are. It's easier to conquer worlds when you have diplomatic cover. Dr. Wung activated a holographic display showing current galactic political trends. The situation is deteriorating faster than our projections suggested. The Council's mediation capabilities have dropped significantly. They're dealing with more active conflicts now than at any time since the formation of the organization. Good, Torres said firmly, then caught Dr. Wung's surprised expression. I don't mean good that people are suffering, James. I mean good that the consequences of their choices are becoming apparent. For too long, they could rely on humanity to clean up the messes created by their political cowardice. Dr. Wung nodded slowly. The question is whether we maintain our current position or consider selective re-engagement. Admiral Torres turned away from the viewport, her decision already made. We maintain position, but we also prepare for the inevitable. Which is, they're going to offer us something significant to return. Something they think we want badly enough to overlook 3 centuries of dismissive treatment. And when they do, we need to be ready to respond appropriately. Back on the Council station, the session had resumed with no progress toward resolution. The Merchant Guild and Zeridian Collective remained deadlocked, and the conflict was beginning to affect other systems as trade routes shifted to avoid the disputed region. High Counselor Vexani finally called for an adjournment, something that hadn't happened in living memory for such a straightforward territorial dispute. As delegates filed out in frustrated groups, many of them were thinking the same thing. This would have been resolved hours ago if Ambassador Chen had been present. The realization was spreading throughout Council space that humanity's departure hadn't just removed one voice from the debates. It had removed the voice that others had unconsciously relied upon to find solutions when traditional diplomacy failed. In the aftermath of the failed session, secret communications began flowing between various species intelligence services. The conversation was always similar. How much would it cost to bring humanity back? What were they really after? Was their withdrawal a negotiating tactic or a genuine abandonment of galactic politics? What none of them understood was that humanity's silence wasn't a negotiation strategy. It was a test. They were waiting to see whether the galaxy could learn to function without constantly relying on human problem-solving abilities. They were waiting to see if the Council would develop the wisdom to address the underlying issues that had driven humanity away, or if they would simply try to solve the immediate crisis while ignoring its deeper causes. Most importantly, they were waiting to see if anyone in the Council would have the courage to admit that perhaps humanity's concerns had been legitimate all along. The test was becoming harder to pass with each day of continued chaos, but humanity remained patient. They had learned, after all, that sometimes the most important conversations were the ones you chose not to have until the other party was truly ready to listen. 1 year after humanity's withdrawal, the galaxy faced its greatest crisis since the Krillian War. The situation began innocuously enough. A routine archaeological expedition by the Etherian Exploration Corps discovered ruins on an uncharted world in the galactic periphery. What they found beneath the ancient structures changed everything. Dr. Kelani stood before the emergency council session, her usually serene ethereal form crackling with unprecedented agitation. Her report sent waves of fear throughout the assembled delegates. "The artifacts are definitely of predecessor origin," she announced, her voice carrying harmonics of terror that needed no translation. "But these aren't the benevolent ruins we've found before. These are weapons designed to sterilize entire star systems." The chamber erupted in panicked discussions. The predecessors were a mystery that had haunted galactic civilization for millennia, an advanced species that had vanished without explanation, leaving behind only cryptic ruins and technology that current civilizations could barely comprehend. Their disappearance was considered one of the galaxy's greatest unsolved mysteries. High Counselor Vexani's energy matrix pulsed with deep concern. "Explain the nature of these weapons, Dr. Kelani." The Etherian scientist activated a holographic display showing detailed scans of the discovered technology. The devices appear to be quantum cascade generators capable of destabilizing stellar cores. A single weapon could trigger supernovas in multiple star systems simultaneously. Based on our preliminary analysis, the predecessors built enough of these weapons to effectively sterilize the entire galaxy. Ambassador Zekthar's tentacles went rigid with shock. That would explain their disappearance. They destroyed themselves rather than face some threat. Processor Unit 7742 interfaced with the archaeological data, his optical sensors brightening with alarm. "Negative. Analysis of the blast patterns suggests these weapons were never used against the predecessors themselves. They were used against something else, something that was coming toward the galaxy from outside." The implications struck the assembled delegates like a physical blow. Commander Velter was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. If the predecessors, with all their advanced technology, felt the need to build weapons capable of sterilizing the entire galaxy, what were they trying to stop? Dr. Kelani's form flickered with distress. "That's not the worst part. The quantum resonance patterns suggest these weapons were used recently. Within the last 2,000 years, someone or something activated the predecessor defense network, and based on the directional focus of the blast patterns." She paused, gathering courage to deliver the final blow. "Whatever they were fighting is still coming, and it's going to arrive within the next 5 to 10 years. The silence that followed was absolute. Every species represented in the chamber understood the implications. They faced a threat so terrible that the most advanced civilization in galactic history had been willing to destroy everything rather than face it. Merchant Guild Representative Kexira broke the silence with a voice barely above a whisper. "What? What do we do?" High Counselor Vexani expanded their energy field, drawing on millennia of experience to maintain calm in the face of existential terror. "We must analyze these weapons, understand their technology, and prepare our defenses. This crisis supersedes all previous concerns." But as the emergency committees formed and desperate plans began taking shape, a sobering realization emerged. The Council lacked the scientific expertise and technological innovation necessary to understand predecessor technology. For 3 centuries, they had relied on humanity's unique combination of scientific curiosity and engineering innovation to solve their most challenging problems. Thisara approached Zekthar after the session, her eye stalks drooping with exhaustion and fear. We need them back, not for politics or mediation, but for survival. Human researchers are the only ones who have ever successfully reverse-engineered predecessor technology. Zekthar was already composing the message in his mind. The question is whether they'll help us after we spent centuries ignoring their warnings and dismissing their contributions. 3 days later, Admiral Rebecca Torres received the Council's desperate plea for assistance aboard New Geneva Asterisk. The message was formally addressed to the government of humanity and carried the authorization codes of every major species in Council space. Dr. James Wung read the message aloud in the emergency session of Humanity's Governing Council. They're requesting immediate scientific and military cooperation to address a galactic-level extinction threat. They're offering everything. Complete political autonomy, favorable trade status, territorial concessions, even formal recognition as the Council's primary scientific advisors. Admiral Torres studied the accompanying data files with growing amazement. The predecessor weapons were unlike anything humanity had encountered, but the underlying physics were tantalizingly familiar. Our theoretical work on quantum cascade reactions could be applicable here. We might actually be able to understand these weapons. The question, said Dr. Wung quietly, is whether we help them. The debate that followed lasted 18 hours and involved every major human settlement in known space. Some argued for immediate assistance. The threat was too great to ignore, regardless of past grievances. Others demanded concrete guarantees that this wouldn't simply return humanity to its previous position of providing solutions while being ignored in decision-making. President Maria Santos, Earth's elected leader, finally called for order. The ethical choice is clear. We can't let billions of sentient beings die because we're angry about political mistreatment. But we also can't pretend that nothing has changed. Admiral Torres nodded agreement. I propose a conditional response. We provide technical assistance and scientific expertise, but we do so as an independent partner, not as a council member. We maintain our political autonomy while helping address this crisis. The vote was unanimous. The response Humanity sent back to the Council was brief and professional. Humanity acknowledges the severity of the situation and is prepared to provide scientific and technical assistance. We will dispatch our best researchers and engineers immediately. However, this cooperation is offered as an act of interspecies solidarity, not as a return to Council membership. Our political independence remains non-negotiable. When the human research teams arrived at the predecessor site, they brought with them 3 centuries of accumulated expertise in understanding alien technology. But more importantly, they brought the one thing the Council had lost in their absence: the willingness to ask uncomfortable questions and challenge established assumptions. Dr. Sarah Chen, who had returned to her scientific career after leaving diplomacy, led the human research effort. Standing before the ancient weapons that could destroy civilizations, she asked the question that no one else had dared to voice. What if the predecessors were wrong? What if there was another solution they didn't consider? It was a very human question, the assumption that even the most advanced civilization could make mistakes, that there might always be another way. For the Council species, who had spent millennia viewing the predecessors with religious awe, it was almost blasphemous. But as they began analyzing the weapons with human methodology, patterns emerged that had been invisible to more conventional approaches. The predecessors had indeed been brilliant, but they had also been trapped by their own assumptions about the nature of the threat they faced. Humanity was about to prove that sometimes the most advanced civilizations needed someone willing to think differently, to question the impossible, and to refuse to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. The galaxy was about to remember why they had missed humanity's voice in their councils, and why some perspectives were irreplaceable when facing the impossible. The breakthrough came 18 months after humanity's scientific teams arrived at the predecessor site. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before a holographic display that showed what no other species had been able to see, not just the weapons themselves, but the complete defensive network the predecessors had built across the galaxy. They didn't just build weapons, she explained to the mixed human and council research team. They built a comprehensive detection and response system. These quantum cascade generators were the last resort, not the primary defense. Dr. Kelani's ethereal form shimmered with confusion. But our scans showed the weapons were used, the quantum resonance patterns. Were from test firings, interrupted Dr. Marcus Webb, humanity's lead quantum physicist. The predecessors were calibrating the system, not using it in desperation. Look at these power distribution patterns, they're methodical, systematic. This was preparation, not panic. Zekthar, who had been granted special permission to observe the research, manipulated the holographic data with his tentacles. If these were only tests, then what happened to the threat they were preparing for? Sarah Chen smiled, the first genuine smile any council member had seen from a human in over 2 years. That's where it gets interesting. We found something else in the data. Communication logs, partially degraded but recoverable with human cryptographic techniques. The translated logs appeared in the holographic display, written in the ancient predecessor language that scholars had spent centuries trying to decode. Humanity had cracked it in 6 months using linguistic analysis methods that treated it as a living language rather than dead text. The threat wasn't an invasion, Sarah continued. It was a refugee crisis, a massive civilization fleeing the destruction of their home galaxy, billions of beings looking for a place to survive. The research team stared at the data in stunned silence. Everything they had assumed about the predecessor disappearance was wrong. But the weapons, Processor Unit 7742 began, were built by a faction of predecessors who believed the refugees were too dangerous to allow entry, Dr. Webb explained. They saw an alien civilization with unknown intentions and assumed the worst. But there was another faction, one that believed in finding a peaceful solution. Sarah activated another data stream. The predecessors spent decades debating what to do. The archaeological record shows increasing division in their society. Finally, the peace faction made a decision that changed everything. The hologram shifted to show energy signatures from across the galaxy, dated to the approximate time of the predecessor disappearance. They didn't destroy themselves or get conquered, Sarah said quietly. They left. The entire civilization packed up and went to meet the refugees in intergalactic space. They abandoned the galaxy rather than fight a war or condemn billions of beings to die in the void. The silence that followed was profound. Every species in the research team was processing the implications of this revelation. Thisara, who had been monitoring the research progress, finally spoke. But that means... The refugees are still coming, Dr. Webb confirmed. The predecessor defense network has been dormant for 2,000 years, but the quantum signatures indicate the refugee fleet is still approaching. They'll arrive within the next 3 years. Admiral Torres, who had been observing via secure communication link from human space, appeared on the holographic display. How many refugees are we talking about? Sarah checked the calculations again before answering. Approximately 40 billion beings from a civilization that spanned their entire home galaxy before its destruction. They've been traveling through intergalactic space for over 2 millennia, keeping their population alive in generational ships. The magnitude of the approaching crisis dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever faced. 40 billion refugees would strain every resource, challenge every assumption about territorial boundaries, and require unprecedented cooperation between species that had been fighting over mining rights just months earlier. High Counselor Vexani materialized in the research chamber, their energy matrix pulsing with deep concern. The Council must be informed immediately. We need to prepare for the largest refugee crisis in galactic history. But Sarah Chen held up a hand, stopping the ancient entity. Before you start planning emergency sessions and crisis committees, there's something else you need to understand. We found the predecessor peace faction's final message. She activated one last data stream, a message that had been hidden in the quantum resonance of the abandoned defense network, waiting for someone with sufficient technical skill and linguistic ability to decode it. The message was simple but profound. We go to meet them as equals, not as conquerors or conquered. We choose to see potential allies rather than inevitable enemies. We choose hope over fear. May those who come after us make better choices than we did in our final days. Dr. Kelani's form brightened with understanding. They left us a choice. We can activate their weapons and destroy the refugee fleet before it arrives, or we can follow their example and choose a different path. Zekthar's tentacles moved in patterns that indicated deep thought. 40 billion refugees. The logistics alone are manageable, Sarah interrupted, if we approach this as a species-wide cooperation effort rather than a crisis to be contained. The galaxy has thousands of suitable worlds for colonization. What we lack isn't space or resources, it's the willingness to work together on a scale we've never attempted before. Admiral Tor's holographic presence focused intently on the Council representatives. This is humanity's condition for continued cooperation, not political concessions or trade agreements, but a fundamental change in how the galaxy approaches problems. No more thinking in terms of winners and losers, no more prioritizing short-term political gains over long-term stability. High Counselor Vexani's energy matrix pulsed with what might have been amusement. You're asking us to evolve as a galactic civilization. We're asking you to grow up, Sarah said bluntly. The predecessors faced this choice and chose wisdom over fear. 40 billion lives are depending on whether we can do the same. Over the following months, something unprecedented happened in galactic politics. Species that had maintained suspicious distance for centuries began working together with an efficiency that surprised everyone, especially themselves. The threat of managing 40 billion refugees had accomplished what 300 years of diplomatic efforts had failed to achieve: genuine cooperation. The hegemony abandoned their expansion efforts and volunteered their military logistics capabilities for refugee settlement coordination. The Merchant Guild created an economic framework for integrating refugee populations without destabilizing existing trade networks. Even traditionally isolationist species contributed resources and expertise. Humanity found itself not as the galaxy's problem solvers, but as partners in the largest humanitarian effort in galactic history. They provided crucial expertise and innovative solutions, but they were no longer expected to carry the burden alone. When the refugee fleet finally arrived, a constellation of massive ships carrying the last survivors of a dead galaxy, they were met not with weapons, but with welcome committees representing every major civilization in the galaxy. The predecessor's message of hope over fear had finally found its intended audience. Dr. Sarah Chen, now serving as humanity's special advisor for interspecies cooperation, stood on the observation deck of the orbital station that had become the coordination center for refugee settlement. Through the transparent aluminum viewport, she could see ships from dozens of species working together to guide the massive refugee vessels toward their new homes. "Do you think this would have happened if humanity hadn't withdrawn from the Council?" asked Dr. Wang, joining her at the viewport. Sarah considered the question carefully. "No. The Council needed to learn that they could function without us before they could truly function with us. Our silence taught them the value of the conversations they had taken for granted." Admiral Torres approached, carrying the latest reports from the refugee integration committees. 70% of the refugee fleet has been successfully settled on suitable worlds. The remaining 30% will be housed within 6 months. No major conflicts, no resource wars, no territorial disputes. Sarah smiled, watching a human transport vessel docking with a refugee ship, while Vortanian medical teams prepared to receive new arrivals. Sometimes the most important thing you can teach someone is that they're stronger than they think they are. The galaxy just needed to prove to itself that cooperation was possible. The great irony was that humanity's silent departure had finally taught the galaxy how to listen. Their withdrawal from conversations had made every remaining voice more valuable. Their absence had demonstrated the importance of diverse perspectives, and their conditional return had established that true partnership required mutual respect. The refugees brought new technologies, new ideas, and new perspectives that enriched galactic civilization beyond anyone's expectations. But more importantly, their arrival had created something that had eluded the galaxy for millennia: a genuine sense of unity born from shared purpose rather than political convenience. Humanity had returned to galactic civilization, but on their own terms. They were no longer the species that solved everyone else's problems, but partners in building a galaxy where problems were solved collectively. The conversation had finally become one worth having. And in the depths of space, the abandoned predecessor defense network powered down permanently, its quantum cascade weapons deactivating as the galaxy chose hope over fear, unity over division, and wisdom over the easy path of destructive solutions. The galaxy had learned to speak with one voice when it mattered most, and humanity had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was remain silent until others were ready to truly listen.